So my name is Chelliah. I am first and foremost an open source geek at heart. My day job is I work for a company called Altispeed Technologies. We are an IT managed service provider. So essentially, we're a group of IT guys for companies that can't afford an IT guy. That mission statement, empowering users to leverage technology to its full potential, it is not a brochure filler. It is not something that we use just for advertisement. It is absolutely a core belief to everybody who works at the company, to include myself. We desperately believe in placing power in the hands of users and helping people, empowering people to be able to leverage technology for their advantage rather than making them slaves to a corporation or to a product or service. And then every week I host the talk radio show. I believe it's the only talk radio show carried on terrestrial radio in the United States that has a focus of Linux and open source. So I will just refer to the event around 2019 and 2020 that made us all experts in remote technology. And so we had companies that for 10 years had told me, no, there's no way we can operate as a remote company. And all of a sudden, hey, we need to do that by Friday. And so we immediately started that transition and we learned a lot. There was so much talk about the advantages and the glory of working from home. And what we found very early on was there's also a significant amount of challenges, right? Because first of all of the data and resources that you use to do your job are at your office. Secondly, when your office becomes your home, I have 3 kids under the age of 12, which meant there's never a dull moment in my house. And now my office became their classroom and their playroom. It was challenging. On top of that, we become slaves to an internet connection, which was particularly frustrating for me because I've spent the last 15, 20 years trying to convince people to get off of any sort of reliance on somebody else's infrastructure, to host it themselves, to own it themselves. So the fact that I became a slave to the internet bugged the heck out of me. And finally, my home lab is there for me to learn about technology. It is not designed or was not designed to carry critical client infrastructure and do actual work that matters. So let me take you back to some of the problems that I was facing. So if I take you back to when I was in college. Now, you've heard, if you've worked with ZFS, you may have heard of RAID Z1 or RAID Z2. What you probably haven't heard of is lazy data storage. And basically, it goes something like this. Let's say you're a broke college student and you need to store data and you desperately believe in hosting it yourself. So you purchase a hard drive and you put all the data you care about on your drive. A few years later, you buy a second drive. Now we have 2 copies of the data. We copy all the stuff that we care about onto that new drive and place the first one inside of, we'll call it an archive, basically a glorified suitcase. A few years later, you purchase a 3 drive. Now we have 3 copies of our data and so on and so forth. I'll be honest with you, it works. It's not great. It's not an industry standard for good reason, but it works. The problem is you wind up with something like this, a gigantic suitcase full of hard drives for the last 10 to 15 years. Now, as embarrassing as that is, as a guy who works for an IT company, I will tell you that I never actually lost a file to include Mr. Mord in my, I think, 8th grade class, which was the only teacher that allowed me to bring a laptop. I still have every presentation and all of my class notes because he allowed me to have a laptop, and my lazy storage actually functioned. But I had to fix this if I was going to work from home. So I embarked on this process to essentially build infrastructure inside of my home. Now, I had experience doing this, obviously, at Altispeed and had experience doing this for clients. If you've not done data before, there's a fantastic principle that was first referenced by a photographer actually named Peter Crow. And the idea is the 3-2-1 backup strategy. And it says something like this. Ideally, you want 3 copies of your data. Why 3? Because if we make a copy from 1 to 2, there is the potential for something to go wrong. And in that potential, you may corrupt either the source or the destination. So we want to have not just 1 copy, not just 2 copies, 3 copies of the data at all times. Additionally, you want to, if you can, use two different media sources. And what I mean by two different media sources is you want to store it on perhaps a hard drive and then a second source, like an optical drive or tape, something like that. The idea being, if you suffer some sort of failure, if you bought three of the exact same hard drives and there was a problem with that hard drive model or manufacturer, you potentially lose data. And so I wouldn't necessarily say this is a hard and fast rule, but it's a great way to evaluate your data risk exposure. That means, what is the likelihood I'm going to lose something? And finally, one offsite backup copy. The idea here being, the if you have all of your data in one place and the building burns down or something happens to those machines, you're host. So it's a great way to evaluate, is my data safe and can I rely on it? So using that strategy, I started to build this infrastructure in my house. Now, before I got to the back end, I wanted to build the front end. Working off of a 13-inch laptop hunched over on my couch sucks. So I purchased two 27-inch 2K displays, a Lenovo Thunderbolt dock. I still think trackballs are the bee's knees, and like a uplift sit-stand desk. And that improved my ergonomic situation greatly. So I had the front end, and also I took over a spare room in my basement, meaning that I was away from my children's classroom, also my living room. So we're improving. But then I had to do something on the back end with my data and hosting. So I took this old spare desktop that I have. The idea here was not to make it pretty, it was to be functional. And so threw some drives in it, set it up with CentOS, and had LVM running on it, and that became my backup server. So now I had my primary server, which had always existed in my home. I had a real backup server that actually functioned and started doing offsite backups. So that was functional. And we could have left it there and I could have gotten the job done. But I started to think, what would be the best way to do this? Because one of the problems is, in the 1950s and 1960s, when they were designing homes, they put the network operations center in the same place that we put our laundry machines. And I don't know why we did it that way back in the 50s and 60s, but it presents problems in the way of lint and dust and all those sorts of things. And so I wanted to get at least the backup server out of the network operations center and into like maybe a closet. And so I started looking for a computer that would meet the spousal approval factor, because my wife didn't really care for that in our living room. And I came up with the HP ProLiant Gen 10. This thing is a fantastic little toy, let me tell you. So I picked it up for like maybe $400 on eBay. The thing that is absolutely brilliant about this device, it's maybe yay big and has four 3.5-inch slots. That front cover comes off, and there's four 3.5-inch slots, and then on the top is a separate 2.5-inch slot, which is fantastic because you're able to set up the operating system to run on the 2.5-inch on an SSD and still have all of your data in a proper array. The other thing is, because it's small, I was able to take it off-site. So with my minimum get it done strategy, it worked. But the problem was, I had all of the data in one location at the time that I was doing my monthly offsite backups, right? Pelican case comes home and I'm running the backup, and now all three copies are in one place. This device allowed me to start taking that to my office. So now the offsite backup stays offsite the entire time, and we're not sending private data, even encrypted, through the internet. It all stays offline. So this was really fantastic. And again, got it out of the network operations center. So I had it in two locations in my house. It's also right by the front door, which made it really handy. At Altispeed, we dog food everything. There's not a stick of equipment that I've ever put in for a client that hasn't also run in my house. And I take that very seriously. And so one of the things that we have done is we've had our finger on the pulse of what's happening in the IT industry. And we see that people are moving from what we used to do 20 years ago, which was we'd sell you a server, we'd sell you some computers, we'd sell you some networking equipment, we'd plug it all in, and we'd maintain it for you. Nobody does, but not nobody, but very few people are doing business like that. Today, people are buying a tablet, they connect it to their Wi-Fi, and they say, give me my apps and deliver the service and how much a month. That's what they're asking for. Now, I have to find a way to sleep at night, and I've spent the last 20 years telling people to own their technology. And I think, if I was to speculate, what went wrong is we started in the 80s and 90s having to work off of servers and centralized technology like mainframes. somewhere in the mid to late 90s, we started to get enough horsepower in computers where we could run it locally. And people like me, and probably most of you in this room, rejoiced. But a lot of people got bit, in part because they didn't know how to leverage their own technology. So I'm just working off my laptop here. I just saved it to the desktop, and now my laptop crashed. Where's all my files? Oh, they're on the desktop. Oh, jeez. And then they get bit. So the reaction, again, somewhat strange to me, but they pushed it off to cloud services. And they said, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, you have my data, you deal with it, you manage it because I'm not good at it and I just want to get the job done. That's fine. But again, didn't really work for me. So we started to look at ways that we could provide what customers were asking for. I don't want the potato. You take my potato and you charge me a monthly fee and just let me use my potato, but you take responsibility for it. So we started to design systems that were based in open source. And the idea being is fine, we will hold on to your potato. We will manage your potato well. We have the advantage of the fact that Amazon and Google and all of these big companies are using Linux and open source to accomplish this anyway. So we maintain that for them with the understanding that if they ever say, I want my potato back, no problem. We'll bring it, set it down onto your infrastructure. We give you all the documentation and you're good to go. And if you don't want to do that, that's fine. We'll host it in our data center and you pay us a monthly fee for it. So we've been playing with that and we've been slowly working our way into that. But in the interest of, again, I have to dog food it. I wanted to run this inside of my own home. So I took this opportunity of this whole backup project to say, this is the time I'm going to try to run an entire world inside of as small of a thing as possible. Now, in my home, I have a 42U rack, got a 2U Dell virtual host. I have another Dell 2U Supermicro, actually, file server. So I have all of this infrastructure and it's fine and it works for me. The problem is it wasn't terribly portable. And so I started to think, what else could this little HP ProLiant thing do? And it turns out it can do a lot. So I started to look at operating systems that we could run. Now, all of these operating systems have their advantages. If you're just looking for a great drop and play storage solution, TrueNAS is fantastic. It's appliance, you install it, you run it, and it'll store your files. The problem is when you want to go tinker under the hood, they're less supportive of that. They want you to do everything through the UI. And that's a problem if you're a geek and want to push a machine to its limits. I tried RHEL. We've had great success using RHEL and RHEL derivatives in production. They're fantastic. The problem is, again, they rely on, if you're wanting to use ZFS, on a DKMS module, which leads to, at times, spending 12 plus hours in a data closet rebuilding something because it failed to recompile and now all of a sudden nobody can access the data. The other thing is Ubuntu allows you to have one tool to do a number of things. So as I started to look, well, what could Ubuntu do? It turns out Ubuntu can act as a file server. It can work flawlessly with ZFS. It can work as a virtual host. It can work as a container host. It can do all the things under one operating system. There's also long-term support. So I know updates are going to come from Canonical. I know that the system is going to be up to date. And if I get it over my head, I know that there's some community support that's available. So Ubuntu was a pretty good choice. There's a little HP ProLiant sitting inside of our coat closet. It has the advantage of being right by the front door. So every day I walk in or out of the house and I can keep an eye on it, see what's happening. And if there's an emergency, I can take it and walk out the front door. I was able to get all of my services and I thought, I wonder what would happen if I moved all of these VMs that are currently running on this big, massive Dell virtual host over to this tiny little ProLiant HP server. And it turns out it works great, as well as all of the containers that are running in my house. And so for a few weeks, my entire house, instead of running in this big 42U rack, ran off of that tiny little server. And I thought, man, this has some real potential. So I started to think, how could I take this portable? Fast forward to 2021, 2022, we start to get to our new normal. And that means clients are now demanding I'm back on site and in hotels. And now I'm back to working off of a 13-inch laptop. Again, see my previous notes on the ergonomic suck of hunched over a 13-inch laptop. I didn't want to go back to that, but the problem is it's also not practical to drag two 27-inch displays and a sit-stand desk and all the things, right? Not practical. So I started to think, how can I condense this down from a 42U rack, a 50 amp circuit, 4 U's of servers, and a 48 port switch down to something that could potentially run off of a battery and or a generator to help me use this when we're camping inside of our RV. So we had the server and I had all of the data part worked out. Now I needed just enough network to make this work because the server really wasn't functional without anything to connect it to. And so I started to think, how can I build the smallest minimal viable network? And so this little case from SKB Rotorworks, which I highly recommend because the thing is darn near indestructible. It can get hit with a Ford F-150 and not crunch. Ask me how I know that. Put inside a Netgate 1100 that's running pfSense, a little Netgear 1 gig switch, and then the Intel NUC Skull Canyon that I was using as a virtual host. Now, some of you are thinking, you just said you got everything running on this little HP. Why the Skull Canyon? Well, sometimes it isn't necessary to pull 60 terabytes of data with you everywhere you go. And as small as the HP is, it still adds some weight and size. And so the little Skull Canyon, if I'm going somewhere and I don't need everything, I just need some things, turns out a little 2 terabyte NVMe drive inside of that thing works just fine. So here is a screenshot of this completely self-contained world running. So there's a file server, there is Home Assistant running, Jellyfin for entertainment, Matrix for local communication, Wiki.js to take my vast knowledge with me, a mind test server because my kids are directive. Now, the Ansible director, this is a bit more aspirational than reality at the moment, but the idea is throughout this process, I probably set up and blew this thing away 1,000 times. And somewhere in there, I got real sick of doing it by hand. And so I started to develop a playbook that I give it the data and I say, here's my data. It goes, sets up all the VMs, installs all the software, imports all the data. And someday it will get to the point where I won't have to do anything. I'll just connect it and then run the playbook and everything will exist. We're not quite there yet. So this is a picture of this being used in production. Now, I live in North Dakota in the United States. For those of you that are not great with geography, it gets warmer on Mars some days of the year than it does in North Dakota. The air hurts your face 7 months out of the year. And so the ability to exist out in the middle of nowhere, I think, it says something, right? So this is entirely self-contained. It provides all of the necessary infrastructure that I need to get work done locally. I need no internet connection whatsoever. It also provides all of the automation that I had at home. Probably not something I would have set out to do on its own, but as I started to look and see how easy it was to just slide the stuff around, it turned out to be fairly obvious that I can actually take that with me in a 19-foot travel trailer, no problem. And then the kids are happy because they're able to keep their mind test world and copy it over and carry on, even if we don't have an internet connection. This is just another photo of the side view of my wife and I sitting in bed watching Forensic Files. Again, all our entertainment comes with us inside of the self-contained little world. And this device, the Vero 4K, I don't know how many of you have seen this thing, but this is a brilliant device. So this is an out-of-the-box Kodi experience. If you're looking for a way to have Kodi or have access to Kodi without having to set up a device or install anything, buy this little box for it's like $100. In fact, they just released the 5, a little over $100, and will run Kodi out of the box. They forked it and they call it Open Source Media Center, OSMC, and they have a really fantastic little UI. The thing I like about it, fantastic performance, runs on 5 volts, which means it works great inside of the RV off of a battery, and it's small and compact. It also has the added advantage, unlike my NVIDIA Shield, which constantly ejects me from Kodi and takes me back into their ads for their streaming services, which I never asked for, never wanted, and tried to disable multiple times. Vero 4K doesn't do that. And the Vero 5 just came out, so I'll be purchasing one of those. So I was able to take my little world with me. The problem was, again, I still don't have a way to actually work. We're still hunched over a 13-inch laptop. And so I started to think, how can I take this little battle station with me? And I tried a number of different things. So Dell and a number of other companies make, maybe you've seen these ultra-wide displays. The reality is, once you get past 27 inches, it becomes nearly impossible to effectively transport such a device because they make cases for 27-inch monitors. After that, it goes to like 42-inch monitors. It becomes a massive monstrosity that becomes almost impossible to fit in the back of my compact car. So I started to see, how can I build the absolute minimal to get a monitor at a decent height, a decent resolution, a keyboard, a trackball. And what I came up with was actually fairly simplistic. It's a piece of plywood. In this photo, this is iteration one, is mounted to actually a percussion stand and then a little foldable stool. The final version, I actually used a keyboard stand from GatorWorks, which is a brilliant little device. It's a folding keyboard stand, but it can take a tremendous amount of weight. And just took my 3/4-inch plywood surface, ordered some Chinesium desk pad from China, and added my Thunderbolt dock and a single 27-inch P-series monitor, keyboard, trackball, and a little travel stool. And it turns out that can all fit inside of a Pelican case that fits inside of the back of my compact car. And I can take it into hotels. I can take it into client places, and I can use it inside of an RV in the middle of North Dakota. The takeaways here, first of all, everyone in this room has access to these tools. And that is a drastic change from where we were 20 years ago. When I was in college, I would go and they would say, look, son, you can set up Active Directory and you can enroll all these clients and you can push group policy. And I thought, that's great, awesome. How do I do that in my house? And they went, no problem. You just spend $1,000 on a Windows license and then $50 per cow for every user that touches the machine, not just the. It's not attainable. It's not practical. And I understand that there's some complicated method now where you can get access as a student to some limited resources, as long as you use it in the way that Microsoft wants you to do it. I get all of that. But the reality is today's enterprise world doesn't function like that anymore. It's increasingly moving towards microservices, towards Linux, towards open source things that are available to each and every one of you inside of this room. The second thing is nobody can pull the rug out from under you. So once you set something like this up, you can create your own little world and you can have it until the day you die because nobody can take the code from you. It comes with you everywhere. If I can do this where the air hurts my face 7 months out of the year, you can do this. And again, this is the way the big boys are doing it. You look at Google, you look at Amazon, you look at eBay, you look at Netflix. All of these companies are leveraging open source to make their products. If any of you watched or followed my work with Jupiter Broadcasting or now the Ask Noah show, you know that I've been a massive proponent of desktop Linux. I can't for the life of me understand people who want to use a piece of technology that they don't have administrative access to. I know I'm a dying breed, but that's my preference. These days, as the world is shifting towards, we just want apps, we just want services delivered to our devices, whatever they are, Linux has never been in a better position to say yes and answer that need because they're already doing it. The difference this time around is instead of being behind some corporate paywall, the code is open, it's discoverable, it's shareable, it's explorable, and everybody gets to leverage it. Any questions?
I'm afraid there's no time.
No time for questions. Thank you for your time.